What's good, people? CJ Williams clocking in for Culturalist Theory. Today we're touching on some of the best introductions to the genre in its brief but productive history. With hip-hop recently celebrating its 50th birthday, we've seen a lot of benchmarks. Some of the best being the classic Out of the Gate project. So it should be to no surprise that to make it to this list, the bare minimum is serious classic level consideration. Here's our pick for the 10 best debuts by solo male artists in hip-hop history. Number 10, DMX Its Dark Hell is Hot. Let us take you back to the year 1997, shall we? Hip-hop had 4 #1 singles that year. They were all produced by and or featuring the same person, Sean Puff Daddy Combs, aka Shiny Suit Man. He also had the only number 2 and a number 5 record for good measure. So basically Puff and his sound and style ran hip-hop that year. A quick jump over to 1998 and a glitch will be thrown into that matrix. Diddy was still hot, however the anti-Puff, Darkman X, released not 1 but 2 projects that would set the stage for a legendary 3-album run. To kick that off was the classic debut It's Dark Hell is Hot. No better lead single to signal a changing of the guard was the grimy Get At Me Dog, accompanied by the black and white, equally gritty music video. Having been writing rhymes since the late 80s, DMX finally got his shot at a major label look when A Star Was Born May 19th, 1998. Being a 27-year-old rookie is rare but comes with its advantages. You should be well aware of who you are and by this point have experienced enough life to make a captivating piece of art. It's Dark is well balanced with introspective records like Look Through My Eyes and Let Me Fly, hitting on the same level as the harder records like X Is Coming and Niggas Done Started Something. X even flexed his underrated storytelling skills on Crime Story and the anxiety-inducing ATF. Follow-up singles How It's Going Down and Rough Riders Anthem were radio ready but didn't sound like they were made for the radio, if that makes any sense. Rough Riders Anthem would be our introduction to producer extraordinaire Swizz Beatz. Funny thing is, that was the only record he produced on the 19-track effort. He would have more of a lead role on the follow-up, but it's funny because many people associated the two because of the Monster single, so you would think he was responsible for more. Thankfully, Dame Grease and PK were more than capable as they did most of the heavy lifting behind the boards. Now, could we have done without the skits? Yeah, probably. Did he outshine himself a few months later with his sophomore album, Flesh of My Flesh, Blood of My Blood? Maybe, but that doesn't dim the light on this stellar debut enough to knock it out the top 10. Number 9, Nipsey Hussle, Victory Lap. How many rollouts do you know that are nearly 10 years in the making? Yes, when Nipsey started the marathon, his Victory Lap was a foregone conclusion. Breaking the mold of what a mainstream rapper could accomplish, Nip brushed elbows with artists like Drake and Rick Ross while maintaining his all money in and proud to pay business models. Fast forward to 2018, after several highly impactful mixtape releases, we get the culmination of that relentless work ethic. Instead of doubling down, Hussle would double up with tracks like Dedication, Blue Laces 2, and Hustle and Motivate, remaining authentically Nip while distinguishing himself as more than an archetypal gang rapper. Hussle's storytelling and delivery is crisp, reimagining what a West Coast album's sound and material could encompass. He would delve into subjects ranging from business ownership and self-sufficiency to first-person shootouts and drug dealing. Staying independent would be the biggest payoff of his career, moving 50,000 units independently on his way to a number 4 debut. 30K of those were pure album sales, coming full circle from his $1,000 mixtape days. Features on this would include Kendrick, YG, Puff, The Dream, CeeLo, and Marsha Ambrosius, among others. With Mike and Keys behind the boards on every song but Grinding on My Life, Hussle offered fans his most complete and concise body of work while rewarding listeners for their loyalty in the process. We even got to give him props on the sequence and structuring of the album, quietly telling his life story while wrapping the marathon's narrative in a bow. It's definitely a West Coast album from start to finish, yet stands on its own 2 feet without over-reliance on production or repetitive themes. We don't really know what the distinction is with the bonus tracks, seeing as how the version you find on streaming platforms is either explicit or clean, not a deluxe. But he labeled them extra and we respect that, so if we were looking at the standard 14-song track list, we're gonna let that ride for all 56 minutes. Even adding those extra 2 bonus tracks while Right Hand to God feels a little redundant when you have joints like Rap Niggas and the title track. We've spent more time with Double Up than anything else on the album, and that's saying something. After his untimely passing in March of 2019, Victory Lap would move another 50K and peak at number 2 on the charts. Between the heavily underrated production, narrative cuts that put you in the driver's seat, and the game you couldn't get at a 4-year university, Nip's impact and influence certainly has far-reaching implications. Shout out to Neighborhood Nip. Keep hustling in paradise, homie. Number 8, Ice Cube, America's Most Wanted. You ever heard the phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it? Well, Cube managed to instead fix his own situation and expose how broken NWA's was. Being the main pen and MC behind one of hip-hop's most impactful groups sounds like a dream come true to most, unless you're O'Shea Jackson. After controversially leaving Compton's favorite group, Cube set out to prove that his talents were universally adorned and that the group would miss his skills before he missed theirs. That's exactly what he did with the 1990 debut America's Most Wanted. It was clear as day that when The Nigga You Love to Hate hit car speakers, Cube was the driving force behind NWA's aggressive and political sound. Working with the Bomb Squad, the production team behind Public Enemy's larger-than-life sampling, O'Shea sounded like the second coming of Chuck D. Arguably one of the greatest collabs between East and West, the rapper's delivery was custom fitted for the production. He even tapped Chuck D and Flavor Flav for features on Endangered Species and I'm Only Out for One Thing, respectively. Hear him and Chuck on the same song was almost like hearing Kodak on the Bodak Yellow remix. We know Cube's material differed slightly, incorporating more gangster elements. Public Enemy and NWA also gained traction around the same time. We just find it interesting how the two artists' paths were so similar while being on two different coasts. Gives validity to the idea these problems were happening simultaneously all over the country. America's Most Wanted would be a critical and commercial success, going platinum 4 months after its release. Mind you, there was no lead single or video helping this one chart. Cube's flow and lyricism was still rough around the edges, but man, did that production hold up well or what? When discussing catalogs, Cube is often overlooked, but honestly, them first 4 joints got the classic stamp of approval from us. With that being said, we think it's safe to call this the first solo classic to come out of the West Coast. Like we said, his debut would kick off a crazy run where Cube was either in the studio or on a movie set for more than a decade. Most Wanted sound and material would influence artists like Pac, Nas, and Biggie. Even Redman covered Once Upon a Time in the projects on his song Jersey Yo. The project's biggest selling point has to be its consistency. So there weren't too many songs that had us jumping for the skip button. There were a few that had to be added to the Essentials playlist though. Who's the Mac, Rolling with the Lynch Mob, and The Nigga You Love to Hate still get played over 30 years later. Give that title track another spin too. That joint timeless. Number 7, Reasonable Doubt. Hov's intro would be one of the most unlikely success stories hip-hop would ever see. From a 27-year-old rookie to a 50-year-old billionaire, it all started with Reasonable Doubt. Well, actually a little before that. Jay would make his debut on Wax with Hawaiian Sophie, his mentor Jaz-O's track. He'd appear on a couple of more songs with Jazz before his record label dropped him, sending Jay down the drug-dealing path we find him on his debut. Even before that, Hov was running in circles with Big Daddy Kane, Big L, and Biggie Smalls. He would finally secure the record contract he'd been spending the better part of a decade trying to secure when he came to the realization that nobody could market him as well as he could market himself. Alright, now we're caught up. Reasonable Doubt would see modest success on the charts, debuting at number 23 and charting for 18 weeks. When you drop a project this good, however, commercial success will never do for you what word of mouth will. New York at 96 wasn't an ideal place to be. On the one hand, they had a reeling reputation as the mecca of hip-hop that was being surmounted by West Coast, and even some Southern acts quickly approaching for the crown. On the other hand, you had to compete in a musical environment that housed the likes of Wu-Tang, Nas, Biggie, and Big L. So yeah, he needed that word of mouth badly. Luckily for him, when you drop a Reasonable Doubt, the music will always speak for itself. Singles Dead Presidents and Can't Knock the Hustle would have the streets talking. Side note, how many of y'all realize the promotional single and the album cut were 2 different tracks? I mean, we always wondered why he called it Dead Presidents 2, but we chalked it up to the Mandela effect. Kind of like Ignition remix. He might have called it a remix, but with no recollection of the original, it just took its place. We recommend listening to the original if you haven't. Let us know which version would have made your final cut. Speaking of cuts, joints like Brooklyn's Finest, D Evils, and Can I Live had Jay popped right in the middle of the conversation surrounding New York's best MCs, right along Nas and Big. Although we must say, it's hard to say you're competing when you got outshined like that on Brooklyn's Finest. Jay, if you're watching, we love you, bro. The production, storytelling, and lyricism on the album would be some of the best of Hov's career. Shout out to Ski and Primo for doing God's work on some of those tracks. Even Irv Gotti went crazy on Can I Live. He might be an even better producer than Instigator. If you know, you know. Check out our Jay ranking to see where we placed it though. If we were ranking these debuts strictly on the quality of the album, Reasonable Doubt would certainly be moving up a few slots. And we know it's hard to imagine in hindsight, but Jay's debut was more akin to slow ripples rather than a large splash. Number 6, Kanye West, The College Dropout. Walking the line somewhere between Dr. Dre and Andre 3000, Kanye's career started off in a way nobody could predict. Working closely with producer No ID, West would quickly master the art of sampling. We'll skip the boring stuff, you know, production on the blueprint, working with Alicia Keys. Let's get to the good part. Well, not necessarily in the moment. Back in 2002, Kanye got about as close to death as you could without crossing over, shattering his jaw in a car wreck. Jaw wired shut, back against the wall, Mr. West took the 50 Cent approach, turn lemons into lemonade. He'd grab Shaka Khan's Through the Fire, chop the sample, speed it up, and then proceed to drop the most important song of his career. The stage was set. Nobody knew what to expect from the producer turned rapper, but most betting people thought it would be a flash in the pan moment at best. They probably didn't hear Jesus Walks though, and let Ye tell it, even the A&Rs who did hear it couldn't grasp the potential due to the soundscape of hip-hop at the time. Artists like 50 Cent, DMX, and Ja Rule were running radio, with gangster rap being the prevailing subgenre. In comes this guy in a bear mascot rocking polo shirts. Producing about 90% of the album, audiences would be blown away by West's chipmunk soul and conscious material, quite literally changing the game. I mean, Jesus Walks, Slow Jams, and Family Business would be like nothing fans had heard before, at least not under the guise of hip-hop. Selena Johnson would replace Lauryn Hill's vocals on All Falls Down, and if we might be so bold, elevating the original. Hove, Luda, Mos Def, Talib Kweli, Common, Ye clearly had a business-savvy label backing him. Kanye's current fan base is probably used to delays with his releases, with dates serving as rough estimates rather than concrete promises. But even before he put out his debut, he delayed the album 3 times. I'm giving points for consistency. Def Jam and Rockefeller's investment would pay dividends to any guesses as to who kept him from that #1 debut? Norah Jones, very indicative of the time. Not only was she ahead of her time, she was debuting with over 1 million first week copies. But I digress. The College Dropout would reap its fair share of critical spoils too, winning Grammys for Best Rap Song with Jesus Walks and Best Rap Album. Let Kanye tell it on Last Call, everyone thought his debut was going to flop and he'd have to go back to giving away his best beats. But you can't blame them. If spotting generational talent were easy, scouts wouldn't have a job. Yes, the album has too many skits, and that's light in comparison to critiques we could throw at other projects from that era. When weighing the intangibles, things like influence and legacy can fall between the cracks. Ask artists like Drake, Tyler the Creator, and Chance about their influences. They're gonna point at Ye. The impact would reach far beyond music though, shaping things like a Chris Rock stand-up or pushing a voter base towards a presidential candidate. Is it crazy we're talking about more than one? Start one, bench one, cut one. Let us know how you're ranking the college tapes down below. Number 5, the Notorious B.I.G., Ready to Die. It might have started out as a dream, but Brooklyn pioneer and icon Biggie Smalls quickly turned the idea of becoming rap royalty into a reality. Part autobiography, part epic crime caper, Biggie, born Christopher Wallace, would put the world on notice with his otherworldly flows, lyricism, and storytelling. Being the only album released during Big's lifetime, Ready to Die eerily details Wallace's thoughts on fame, poverty, and depression. We hear traces of isolation and paranoia on joints like Warning, Everyday Struggle, and Suicidal Thoughts. We get celebratory vibes with Juicy and Big Papa, not to mention lyrical showcases on bangers like Unbelievable, The What, and Gimme the Loot. Executive production from Puff and major contributions from Easy Mo B and Chucky Thompson made Biggie's job crystal clear. Stand in front of the mic and change the way audiences listen to rap forever. The album would be met with universal acclaim, controversially missing a 5 mic rating from the source. Dropping just a few months after Nas's praised debut Illmatic, Big's flow and storytelling had him vying for the crown during the most competitive time in hip-hop history. With a sole Method Man feature on The What, the rest of the album's 17-song track list sees Wallace putting on one of the greatest one-man shows we've ever heard. We all know how finicky Rolling Stone can be with their list, but we're wondering if they went through one of the most dramatic staff overhauls ever or if they needed clickbait badly. Initially making it to 133 on their 500 greatest albums of all time list, it would get bumped down a spot on the 2012 revision, then jump all the way to 22 in 2020. Despite all the critical acclaim and commercial buzz Biggie had generated, he would only see 1 Grammy nomination, Best Rap Solo Performance for Big Papa. The remastered cut you'll find on streaming platforms today has versions of Machine Gun Funk and Ready to Die sans their respective samples. Do yourself a favor and look those up on YouTube after the video. Between Biggie and his team, someone executed at the highest level with this project. We're just wondering what conversations took place leading up to his opening line on Me and My Bitch. Let us know down in the comments which of his LPs do you prefer more, Ready to Die or Life After Death. Number 4, Dr. Dre, The Chronic. Instead of spots 3 and 4, you can really view this this as 3A and 3B due to the project's close proximity to each other. No more hints though. Coming off his iconic run as NWA's lead producer, Dr. Dre's departure shook hip-hop to its core and had everyone wondering what's next. The West Coast blueprint for the classics moving forward. We'll take that trade-off any day. Despite popping up on most people's radars in December of '92, Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre started working together when they recorded the intro to the Deep cover soundtrack. Go check it if you haven't and let us know which version you prefer, the original or Pun and Fat Joe trading bars. That was just the start of it. When audiences heard Nothing But a G Thing, it was clear the dynamic had shifted in the West's favor. Damn, we about to get demonetized with these next couple of joints. Bitches ain't shit, The Day Niggas Took Over, and Let Me Ride had us in a chokehold. Shout out to George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic for providing the samples that would help G-Funk dominate for decades. Addressing his beef with Eazy-E on Fuck With Dre Day, Dre and Snoop would send shots over one of the most iconic disses of the 90s. He wasn't the only one being name dropped though. Jerry Heller, Luke Campbell, Tim Dog, and Ice Cube would also be targeted in the scathing 5-minute banger. The album furthered the art of sampling like few have since. One of the more easily identifiable cuts, Roy Ayers' Everybody Loves the Sunshine on Nothing But a G Thing, would get a lot of love. But what about George Clinton's Atomic Dog on Fuck With Dre Day, Parliament's Mothership Connection on Let Me Ride, or Willie Hutch's Brothers Gonna Work It Out on Rat Tat Tat Tat? Even the $20 Sack Pyramid might be the most creative skit we've ever heard in our deep dives. Ah, the elusive skip-free album. We almost made it. Let's meet in the middle and pretend the Doctor's Office and Lyrical Gangbang didn't make the final cut. Agree? We know Dre wasn't the most versatile lyricist or MC on the mic. Luckily, he ain't claimed to be. He did, however, make a case as one of the greatest producers to ever step into a studio. We're not just talking hip-hop. Not only would The Chronic be the first of many iconic Death Row releases, it would launch the careers of West Coast icons Snoop, Nate Dogg, Warren G, Dash Dillinger, and Corrupt. It was so impactful that there are people who recognize the album cover by the brand of zigzag rolling papers that inspired it. This is an interesting intersection of impact and popularity. While The Chronic has been credited as one of the most influential and impactful hip-hop records ever, it never actually topped the Billboard 200, peaking at number 3. By extension, Nothing But a G Thing would reach number 2 on the Hot 100. Not that we recommend it, but for new listeners who indulge in behind-the-scenes shenanigans, we're sure there's a few joints on The Chronic you'll fall in love with. Doesn't really get more timeless than a good G-Funk flip. If you're wondering about the 3A album we mentioned earlier, look no further. Number 3, Snoop Doggy Dogg, Doggy Style. Essentially The Chronic from Snoop's perspective, Doggy Style would see significant improvements in production and delivery when compared to its unofficial predecessor. The album would initially be released to mixed reviews, only coming to its consensus classic status after some time had passed. We're just wondering who didn't clean their ears before listening to this album. Debuting at number 1 behind over 800,000 copies sold in its first week, Snoop was breaking more records than Wilt Chamberlain. At the time, not only was it the best debut for an artist, it was also the fastest selling hip-hop album ever. Early in hip-hop's development, but still a feat even by today's standard. In the headlines for all the wrong reasons, Doggy Style would draw criticisms for lyrics perpetuating sexual violence and gang activity amongst other social ills. While there was a saturation of misogyny that would have made The Chronic blush, even the most staunch critic had to acknowledge the conditions that led to the music. Praised for its realism in depicting everyday conditions, Snoop spoke about some ugly truths on this joint, most notably murder was the case. While recording Doggy Style in August of '93, Snoop would face the biggest legal hurdle of his life. In later interviews, he would speak on the power of manifestation, saying he believed he spoke this murder charge into existence. After being represented by Johnny Cochran, he and his bodyguard would be acquitted in February of '96. Think that had anything to do with his reluctance to embrace death row? Doggy Style would spawn classics like Gin and Juice, Who Am I, and Lottie Dottie, a reimagined flip of the Slick Rick classic. When comparing The Chronic and Doggy Style, we'd say the former probably has the edge in terms of impact and influence. We'd argue Doggy Style more than makes up for it in terms of quality. Snoop would get a major revamp while working with Pharrell and the Neptunes, but we'd attribute a large amount of his 30-year career to his work on these two projects. Hell, we got a Doggy Style shirt hanging up in the closet right now. Cementing G-Funk as one of the most popular subgenres in hip-hop, Doggy Style is arguably the culmination of the sound. Pac certainly had his moment in the sun with joints like California Love and Only God Can Judge Me, but But Doggy Style, combining those synthesizers and samples with Snoop's flow and delivery, is one of the best things that's ever happened to hip-hop. We even get to appreciate the Dogfather as one of rap's premier storytellers and MCs, even if it was only for a brief moment in time. There aren't any songs on here we just outright skip, but we can all agree Daz's verse on Serial Killer is the perfect timestamp to copy and paste an Ice Cube verse. We know him and Dre weren't on good terms, but that's the kind of material that would make us want a full album between the two. Yes, even in 2023. Number 2, 50 Cent, Get Rich or Die Trying. Curtis Jackson, known worldwide as 50 Cent, might be the luckiest unlucky man of all time, or vice versa. If his original plans to release an album under Columbia Records titled Power of the Dollar had gone through, he might not have made this list. On the other hand, he's got to be one of the only people in human history whose life got better after being shot 9 times. Not only would Columbia cancel the release of the album and drop him from the label, but this chain of events would lead to one of hip-hop's earliest mixtape runs, nearly 900,000 in its first week sales, and the beginning of a billion-dollar brand. Before the G-Unit founder was selling shoes, video games, and whatever else he could attach his name to, he needed to become a household name first. What better way to do that by coming out of the gate with a diamond-certified debut? Most artists fail to string together hits like Many Men, 21 Questions, and In the Club over the span of a 10-year career, but 50 ain't like most artists. Being in the pantheon of Dr. Dre proteges alongside artists like Snoop and Eminem, once 50 had the spotlight, he refused to let it go. Released a week early to combat bootleggers and leakers, Curtis' debut would come this close to platinum certification out the gate. The iconic album cover reflecting his journey to superstardom, the semi-autobiographical movie that would spawn from the album, and the subsequent success of a TV show empire would all be a direct result of this once-in-a-lifetime debut. In addition to singles In the Club and 21 Questions, which would both go on to top the Billboard 100, 50 would also fill out the track list with staples P.I.M.P., What Up Gangsta, Bloodhound, and Heat. Can't forget arguably a top 10 storytelling song of all time in Many Men. Despite having the Dre co-sign, the Doctor doesn't make too many appearances behind the boards, with credits on 4 of the album's 16 songs. After the impact of In the Club, we don't think 50 was too mad about it. One of the few albums that can seamlessly integrate Eminem's production, Patiently Waiting would also serve as one of Shady's strongest showcases of potential as a producer. We're glad more of his time was spent in front of the microphone though. Recently celebrating 20 years since its release, we wanted to see what joints don't sound as good as we remember. While even new listeners will enjoy the majority of the project, it's a couple of songs that don't quite hit the same, including If I Can't and Poor Little Rich. None of these were particularly bad. There are just songs on the album that accomplish the same effect with better execution. All things considered, if we had a genie, we know what we would have used all those 3 wishes on. Making Many Men the intro to the album, not only would this have turned the project into a movie, it would have somersaulted the classic into the discussion for greatest opening tracks of all time. Are we the only ones? I mean, finding out more details about the shooting was at the forefront of a lot of listeners' minds when this came out. It would have only been right to get straight to it. A while back, we took a look at J. Cole's Born Sinner and made our own changes to it. Let us know down in the comments if you'd be interested in seeing something like that for this project. Fifth, if you're watching, get at us for that comeback album, dog. Our ear for executive production is second to none. Before we get to the #1 debut album of all time, we do have a few honorable mentions that did not make our list. The Game, the documentary, technically is just his major label debut album. He had an independent debut album called Untold Story. It's labeled a compilation, so we don't really know what to make of it. But as of 2005, it sold over 80,000 copies in the US, so it's not quite as low-key as Power of the Dollar. If we were including it on this list, it probably would have landed somewhere between 7 and 10. Also, Most Def, Black on Both Sides. With the exception of one album, every other project on this list enjoys the benefit of setting up a successful career afterwards, some longer than others. But with Black on Both Sides feeling like Bay's sole project, despite several albums following it, it retroactively takes away from the impact of the album. And now for the moment you've been waiting on, the #1 debut of all time. Number 1, Nas, Illmatic. Pac was like Jesus, Nas wrote the Bible. Dropping the most studied and praised album in hip-hop history was really light work for a teen out of Queensbridge. The original benchmark of all benchmarks, Nas would spend the next decade of his career trying to recreate what is almost unanimously viewed as hip-hop's greatest album. No, it didn't sell 800,000 copies in its first week, nor would it immediately be labeled rap's greatest work. But each and every one of the 60,000 listeners who got it on the ground floor knew they were listening to something special. For those who aren't familiar, while hip-hop was still in its adolescent years, it was standard practice to have one producer working on your project. Think 21 Savage and Metro Boomin without a three-point line. In comes Nas enlisting an A-team of future Hall of Fame producers and DJs. Primo and Large Professor got 3 songs apiece. LES, Pete Rock, and Q-Tip would each also get their own chance to round out the album's 10-song track list. This would give hip-hop listeners a depth and variety in sounds they hadn't even dreamed of before. New York State of Mind, Life's a Bitch, and The World Is Yours all followed each other back to back to back. We can only imagine how many cassette tapes were worn out before they ever got to It Ain't Hard to Tell. Drop your pick for the best song on the album down in the comments. Our sleeper pick gotta be One Love. Between its cultural impact and underrated production, it doesn't get much better than Nas and Q-Tip linking up. Lyrically, this teenager was lapping generational MCs 5 to 10 years older than him. The impact of the project has been seen and heard in artists from J. Cole to The Game and everyone in between. If you think your favorite artist wasn't influenced, we got bad news for you. From baby pics on the album cover to the literal revitalization of East Coast rap, it became the quintessential standard to judge iconic projects. Can you believe this kid was getting Cool G Rap and Rakim comparisons before the album even dropped? And record companies, including Def Jam, still didn't want to sign him? To the OG fans who got this on tape or vinyl, did y'all pay attention to its labeling? Instead of the traditional side A, side B, the album would be labeled 40 Side North, 41st Side South, the main streets that form the Queensbridge housing project's geographic boundaries. Whose idea was it to turn this album into a map, and why haven't we seen this being implemented on other albums? You know us, we can never just let the little details slip by. While this is probably as close to perfect as an album can get, we still have slight complaints. We agree the 10-track formula was perfect, just enough to give the people what they want without the excess that overstays your welcome, but the Genesis is probably one of the worst placed intros in the game. Not that it was a bad song, just completely unnecessary, while also interrupting what would have been an even more iconic sequencing of songs, with New York State of Mind getting things started. As far as actual songs on the album, we'd have to say One Time for Your Mind is the weak link. Ironically, that's the greatest testament we could give Illmatic, because every other project on here would love it if their weakest song was on par. In 2020, Rolling Stone placed the album at number 44 on its list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. 2021 saw it being selected by the Library of Congress to be preserved in the National Recording Registry. You know you're walking on sacred ground when your debut is one of the greatest albums in recorded history. Time really does fly by when you're having fun. And if you didn't know, several of these artists highlighted, like 50, Snoop, and Nas, we've got their own rankings too. So go check our channel out and peruse our selection. Don't be afraid to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, and feel free to see what that super thanks does after you click it. Once again, it's your boy CJ Williams for CT, signing off.